we should make a start. Okay, so let's begin by just going through a short but very important Ramban at the beginning of the Parsha. The Ramban says like this. He highlights the fact that the Parsha begins with the words by Akel Moshe's Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael. The fact that Moshe gathers together this idea of the Kehillah, gathering them together. Who does he gather together? Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael, everyone. Says the Ramban, this includes Ha'anoshim v'Hanoshim, everyone, men, women. Ki kulam isnadu b'meleches HaMishkan. When it came to the donations to the Mishkan, everyone contributed. Ki kulam v'nei Moshe achash etzivu la'Aaron v'Hanasim v'chol b'nei Yisrael Ha'anoshim kol asher dibar Hashem ito b'Har Sinai achei shemar luchos. So what happened was Moshe commanded Aaron and the Nasiim and all of Bnei Yisrael, right? Everything that Hashem had commanded and told him to do. And then he, as we learned last week's Parsha, he covers his face. After that, after he had already told them, he had told them that he had already gathered them together and told them everything that Hashem had said. But there seems to be another gathering together. He gathers them again together. And he says, this could have been, he said, perhaps on the day after he descended from the mountain. And what he did at this point was he told them now the way and how they were to build the Mishkan, as he had been commanded before the Luchos were broken. Since Hashem was appeased in that sense, Hashem had been misratza to them. Hashem had given him the second set of luchos. And there was the new covenant was made with him, with them. That Hashem would go amongst them again. So they went back now, and I think these are really the key words. They went back to how their original state, and that he describes it as the love of their bridal days. And it was known now that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, would be amongst them as before. As it says, make for me a mikdash and I will dwell amongst them. And that is why he says that it is now at this point that Moshe turns around to them and tells them the whole story and everything they have to do in terms of constructing the Mishkan. So what the Ramban does here, I think, is very important. He sets up the description of Moshe's instructions to them in terms of the construction of the Mishkan, and as we'll see, really everything that takes place in this week's Parsha, as following on from that tragedy of the Egel Hazav, the breaking of the luchos, and the second set of luchos, right? So in other words, there's of course a well-known debate as to the chronology here exactly. The way the Ramban seems to be understanding is that Moshe Rabbeinu is told originally about the Mishkan, but it is only after the breaking of the second set that he brings them together and he tells them in detail what they need to do. And if that's the case, then I think the lens through which we have to look at this week's Parsha is through the lens of the difference between the first set and second set. What is the state now of the Jewish people? Where are they? Where are Klal Yisrael up to at this moment in time? That it is now that they're commanded to build. They're now commanded to build the Mishkan. When we look at what the Luchos were and what they represented, the differences between the two. So we immediately notice, as many Mefarshim point out, that the first set are entirely from Hashem, right? The Luchos Rishonos, Hashem himself carves out those Luchos, carves them out and gives them to the Jewish people. Whereas when it comes to the second set, Moshe has to work on himself. Pesol lecha, he's told. You need to carve these out for yourself. And that symbolizes the idea that from here on in, it's going to take a lot more work. It's not going to be something which is simply given to you as is, and it's all done for you. Now, every member of Klal Yisrael has to work on it themselves. That is what the second set represent. And yet, what we know, which is also critically important, is the idea, as Chazal put it so beautifully, luchos v'shivrei luchos menachim ba'oron. That both the luchos, both the new set, the complete set, and the broken pieces that Moshe Rabbeinu breaks when he comes down from the mountain are both there inside the Oron itself. In other words, the message, and I think we can understand it this way, the message that they carry, those broken pieces, the message of the Egel Hazav and the consequences and everything that flows from it, accompanies them as they go forward. It isn't simply that they have a new model now, they have the new second set with what they represent, and the work, the effort they're going to have to put into it, and we forget what has come before. No, those broken pieces of the luchos accompany them too. Now, in last week's Parsha, what we find is a very cryptic dialogue that transpires between Moshe and Yehoshua. Yehoshua is there waiting on the mountain, and as Moshe Rabbeinu comes down the mountain, we find the following words: Vayishma Yehoshua. And Yehoshua heard, Es kol ha'am bere'o. And he hears them, the negative things that they are doing. He hears the sound, or the sound they're making. Vayomer el Moshe. And he says to Moshe, Kol milchama b'machaneh. There is a sound of war. There's a sound of battle in the camp. Vayomer, and he says, Ein kol anos gevura, ve'ein kol anos chalusha. Moshe says, there isn't a sound of mighty warriors, and there isn't a sound of weak people. Kol onos anochi shomea. Kol onos. The word onos means a voice of affliction. And the Meforshim explain, Rashi and it's also in the Malbim, that Yehoshua is trying to present it in a way as a struggle here. There is a struggle between the good and evil. There is a milchama b'machaneh. There is a struggle. There was a disagreement about whether or not they should have worshipped the Egel Hazov. But Moshe Rabbeinu responds and says, what I hear is a kol onos. I hear a single unified voice of affliction. I hear a people afflicted. I hear terrible things going on. The leadership, that says the Ramban, that Moshe Rabbeinu demonstrates there, is he could, if you like, to put it in modern terms, he could read the room. He could see the whole picture. All those diverse voices came together as one. That is what Moshe Rabbeinu could see. But there is another, and it's not a contradiction, another explanation which is very powerful. Shmuel Alter wrote a sefer called Likuti Bosa Likuti, and he quotes an idea in that sefer that he heard, that you can read the pasuk like this. What was this unified voice? What was the single voice that he heard? Kol onos onochi shomea. I heard the sound, I can hear the sound of everyone saying Onochi, Kol Onos Onochi. I hear people saying Onochi, me. That's what Shomea, that's what I hear. Kol Onos Onochi. I hear people worrying about themselves, only about themselves. I don't hear them worrying about others. I don't hear them worrying about Hashem. They are simply Kol Onos Onochi. They are thinking about themselves. That's the sound that I hear descending the mountain. That's how he understands this this posuk, b'derech drush, worrying about themselves in that sense. Fits very much with what we, as we discussed last week, the idea that there was this this fear that accompanied their decision to build the Egel Hazov. They wanted a, if you like, so to speak, they thought they in this pagan idea, as Rav Hirsch explains, sort of bend the will of Hashem to what they thought that's what they could do towards their own needs. They needed that intermediary, if you like, and that's why they wanted it. But what we have then is in this parsha, we therefore have the word Vayakel. Meforshim pick out this unique use of the word Vayakel, the way it begins this parsha, this gathering together. What is Vayakel? Vayakel is the process of taking the broken pieces and gathering them together, somehow into a whole, coming together for that ultimate good and constructing the Mishkan together. So what you have is you have in last week's Parsha, the noise, the sound that Moshe hears is that sound of Anochi. I'm worried about myself. All I'm worried about is myself. Everyone going in different directions. Rashi brings there as well that they were Ivu le'elohos harbe. They wanted many gods. There were lots of that divisiveness, that idea of, well, what is in it for me? What do I want? And this week, Moshe Rabbeinu begins with the words, the Torah begins with Vayakel, he gathered together. The fact is the broken pieces are in the Oron, because not all that is broken can ever be healed. It's one of those powerful ideas of the broken pieces in the luchos, because it's a mistake to go through life thinking that everything that feels broken, that all difficulties in life can somehow be fixed. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes we have to go through life with that sense of luchos v'shivrei luchos menochim ba'aron. We accompany those difficult moments, will stay with us forever. That is what life sometimes is like. The difficult broken pieces will be there. But what we also know is that those difficult moments and the difficulties that people experience can be protected, shielded, prevented from doing too much damage from the notion of Vaykhel, from the completeness, the wholeness that people demonstrate in coming together on the behalf of those who are struggling. That's what we do. When you come together, when other people are there for someone else, what isn't the sense of Anochi, I'm only interested, I'm only worried about myself, but it's the sense of being there for someone else. What happens is the pain of the brokenness, those broken moments in life, becomes easier to deal with. And that is where we have the idea of the luchos, the complete luchos accompanying the broken ones, and the power of the Vaykhel in this week's Parsha. That is the message of Vaykhel. How is it achieved? So what we find most beautifully at the very beginning of the Parsha is the sense that Vaykhel is achieved through unity of Bnei Yisrael in space, as represented by the Mishkan, right? And also unity in time, as represented by Shabbos. Because the Parsha begins with Shabbos. That's how it begins. Vaykhel Moshe, and he says to them, Eila advar shetzivah Hashem la'asosom, sheishes yomim te'aseh malacha. So you see that before Hashem mentions the Mishkan, before they are told how to build, Moshe repeats to them how to build the Mishkan. First he tells them about Shabbos. Now both are essential. Coming together in the sense of a unified place is essential. A unity in space, to have a place that we can come together in a kehillah sense, Vaykhel, is critical. But we also need a unifying sacred time, a space in time, a place in time as well as space. And the problem and the reason for this is very straightforward, because a kehillah, Vaykhel, can come together for a building project as incredible, as miraculous, as wonderful as the Mishkan. But sometimes the very fact that the building project is so incredible, is so important, and is so unifying, can sometimes lead people to lose sight of what the ultimate goal is. That whatever the building is, whatever it is, whatever you're constructing in a physical sense, it's always going to be a means to an end. The Mishkan is there. Why? To bring down the divine presence, to have the Shekhinah in their midst. It has a mission, it has a purpose. Any building, however incredible it ultimately is there for a reason. It is not the end goal in itself. And what we find is that through coming together in time, in Shabbos, they are reminded the whole way through of the fact that their mission, in terms of the unity of space, of place, what they're building, the construction they're doing together, isn't the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is something higher. There's a Medrash HaGadol which says like this. What is the connection, says the Medrash, between Shabbos and the Mishkan? So the Medrash brings a moshel to a king, and the king had a loyal servant, and the king asked the servant to build a beautiful palace, and he says, I want you to give us exact instructions. You need to build this palace in exactly this way, and they do it, and it's incredible, as tremendous simcha. But then there's another less important, perhaps, servant who comes in front, not less important, but someone else who hasn't been noticed perhaps until now, and says in front of the king as follows: Adoni HaMelech. These are the words of the Medrash. My master, the king. V'simcha sheli eino tomaski. You don't mention my joy. What about me? Where's the simcha for me? Immediately, the king turns to her and says, we'll make a simcha for you too. So too, when Hashem commands Moshe to build the Mishkan, Shabbos itself comes in front of Hashem, says, you created me from the 6 days of creation, you sanctified me, and now you're commanding Bnei Yisrael about the Mishkan. You're not mentioning my name. You're not putting me there. Maybe the joy the incredible enthusiasm they're going to have over building the Mishkan. They might profane me. They might forget about me. They might neglect me. Miyad niftan la'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem turns to Shabbos. Omar Moshe and says to Moshe, Ksov Parsha Shabbos. Write a parsha about Shabbos, B'soich Meleches HaMishkan, within the Meleches, the construction of the Mishkan. And the lesson, She'ein binyon adocheres HaShabbos v'lo Yom Tov, the lesson, as Rashi brings, that the building of the Mishkan does not push aside Shabbos and Yom Tov. They were not allowed to build a Mishkan on Shabbos and Yom Tov. With this, I think we understand the depth of what that means. Of course, it has a practical halachic relevance. Shabbos supersedes building the Mishkan. That is how Rashi brings them. Before Hashem explain, that is why it's placed here. You should know, the Mishkan is tremendously important, but Shabbos takes precedence. But look beneath the surface. What is going on here? The fact that the Mishkan doesn't push away Shabbos prevents them from losing sight of the goal, of why they're working. Together they work to create this incredible project, the Mishkan, and together they stop when Hashem tells them to. That is, if you like, the response, almost like the cure to the Kol Onos Onochi, the me focus, the idea, the sound that says, I need to focus on what I need. Coming together not just to build, but to build for the right reasons, to focus on the goal. That is the beauty of Shabbos. Shabbos always reminds us of the ultimate aim in life. Shabbos can only be once a week. It can only work if it's once a week. The whole point is it provides a focus for everything else we do. It's that day, it's that space in time that brings us together. It brings us together in that sense of a kehillah, brings us together. We come together in a place which is shul, but we also come to a place, particularly in that place on this during the space we have in time, the special space in time, which is Shabbos. I don't know about anyone else, but I certainly found, especially at the first half of this, the beginning, this time last year, the beginning of the lockdown, that Shabbos was the saving moment, because, speaking to people who didn't have Shabbos, it was every day was the same. Every day there was a relentless day. There's no difference between days. If you keep Shabbos, it was never like that. It just was never like that. Shabbos has its own routine. And even when that routine was almost like thrown out, because there's no shul, it didn't matter. Shabbos still had its own rhythm. There was something about that kedusha, that sense of holiness in time, which was incredibly precious. And that's what they're reminded to do. Now, this message of the construction of sacred time and not just a sacred place finds another, I think, powerful manifestation in this parsha. Rabbeinu Bachai tells us the following thing. He says to us, if you look at Perek Lamed Gimel Pasuk Chof, it says, "Vayetzu kol adas Yisrael v'gomer vayavoyu." Pasuk, where is it? Pasuk Chof. Yeah, Pasuk Chof. Sorry, Chof Aleph. Vayavoyu kol ish Yisrael kol ish asher nasoi leboy v'chol asher nidvaru choy. So they brought all the things that they were giving to the Mishkan. Hevius trumas asher lechas al moed chol avidos v'yah kodesh. And then the next pasuk Chof Beis, vayavoyu ho'anoshim al hanoshim. What does that mean? Vayavoyu ho'anoshim al hanoshim. The men came with the women, but he says the words al hanoshim means that the noshim bo'u sham bitchila. The women were there first. The women were there first and the men followed later. That's what it means, al hanoshim. When the men came, they already found the women there. They were already there donating what they needed to donate for the Mishkan, what they wanted to donate for the Mishkan. And he says, this is a maila gedola b'noshim. This is the higher level we find with the women in the way they approached the Mishkan, because it was diametrically opposite. It was diametrically opposed to what they did in the context of the Egel Azov. When it came to the Egel Azov, the men rushed forward with their jewelry and say, we're going to give it for this purpose, and not do it, right? They rush forward and they say, here you go, take it. And when it comes to the construction of the Mishkan, it's the direct opposite. The women for whom it would be presumably harder for them to give away their jewelry, they did so, and they rushed to do so. But the Medrash then adds something. Pirkei Rebbe says something which seems a little bit difficult to understand. Hashem gave a reward to the women in this world and in the world to come, because this was Rosh Chodesh. And the Medrash talks about in Olam Haba, there's another reward. Asidos lehischadesh, they will be renewed like Rosh Chodesh, like Rosh Chodesh. But in this world, there's also a reward. What's the reward? Shemasham Rosh Chodesh Yosem Enu Anoshim. The women have a special affinity in Olam Hazeh to Rosh Chodesh. There is a certain there are certain ways that the women, if you like, quote, so to speak, keep Rosh Chodesh more than men, not doing work, whatever it is. There are certain ways in that sense, that they protect Rosh Chodesh more than men. Now, on a basic level, this is quite straightforward. You'll say, well, yes, the construction of the Mishkan, right? The construction of the Mishkan, when the Mishkan is actually set up is on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And therefore, because of that, Rosh Chodesh is special to them. But I think there's something deeper. I think there's something more than just it happens to be Rosh Chodesh when the Mishkan is built. Therefore, Rosh Chodesh they have a special affinity for. No, there's something more than that, I think. You see, what is Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh epitomizes the building of sacred time ourselves. Going back to what we said before. What is Rosh Chodesh? Kadosh al Piriyah. It is the moment where we step forward ourselves and we say, we will create, we will make. Hashem tells us, Kazera Eva Kaddish, this is how you should see the moon, and that's when you should be Makadosh the moon. When you see the moon, you need to make that Kiddush HaChodesh. You need to come and send Eidim to Beis Din, and we need to make Rosh Chodesh ourselves. Shabbos is fixed min hashomayim. Some of the greatest thinkers in our people explain that Shabbos is not just fixed in the sense that it's every seventh day. Shabbos is fixed in the sense that we move and Shabbos stays still. Okay, it's a different way of looking at it. Shabbos is there, we move around the week, and we just re-encounter. It's like going through it's like the train. It's like staying on the train line. Yeah, so we move through the week, and Shabbos stays. We come back to the same Shabbos every week, right? Shabbos is fixed in every sense. It's like a train station. Rosh Chodesh is different. Rosh Chodesh we have to build ourselves. The women understood this. They did not participate in the Egel Hazov, but they rushed to donate to the Mishkan. And therefore, Rosh Chodesh becomes theirs. They demonstrate the pathway for all time that we have this ability to create Kedusha ourselves, to create that unity in time by coming together and making sacred time as well as sacred space, and that we are able to build that ourselves. The Luchos Shniyos, the second set of Luchos, being the idea that we have to do it ourselves. Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who has to hew out the tablets himself. Comes along the Mishkan, the building of the Mishkan. After that, where the Bnei Yisrael are absorbing this message, the people who really understand that message, that it's not just about this building project, it's about what the building project stands for. The Mishkan stands for a place to achieve connection, a place to build not just sacred space, but also sacred time, and therefore Rosh Chodesh, which is the moment of building, the building of sacred space, of sacred time, the women have that privilege, and that's why they're connected to Rosh Chodesh. Final point, final idea. The end of the Parsha, we have an anomaly in the setting up of the Mishkan. What is the anomaly? Now, this, of course, takes place on Rosh Chodesh itself, very much in line with where we are in the year. The Mishkan isn't constructed on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is this Sunday, right? So we're Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that is when the Mishkan is established. But there's a very strange anomaly. The Medrash explains, and the Medrash Rabbah explains, that when the construction of the Mishkan begins after Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from Har Sinai, after Yom Kippur, right? How long does it take to actually construct the Mishkan? It turns out, the Medrash says, it actually only took them 3 months to construct the Mishkan. It took 3 months. So why didn't they build the Mishkan straight away? They didn't build the Mishkan straight away because Hashem wanted to wait until Rosh Chodesh Nisan, until the Mishkan. Only Rosh Chodesh Nisan the Mishkan was. We know that the Rosh Chodesh Nisan takes 10 crown. It was only on Rosh Chodesh Nisan that it was finally established, right? Why? Because Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the day when the month that Yitzchak Avinu was born, and that's when Hashem says, I want to build the Mishkan. Now, to build the Mishkan in 3 months, asks the Be'er Yosef, must have been miraculous. It must have been through the direct involvement of Hashem himself. To do this entire construction project in 3 months, it must have been that Hashem directly drove that construction project. And if that's the case, he asks very simply, why? Why wait? Why the delay? Why would Hashem put in place a miracle to build it in 3 months when he knew that he was going to anyway make it sit there ready to be put up for another 3 months until Rosh Chodesh Nisan? right? What was the purpose of that nace? What was the purpose of that miracle? Says the Be'er Yosef like this. He says that from this we learn, and the lesson that they had to learn was the lesson of patience. Because very often in life, we want to achieve things immediately, straight away, but it doesn't always work like that. The driver of what went wrong with the Egel Hazov, that Medrash and Rashi brings very famously, we mentioned it, we described it, we discussed it last week, yeah? The idea that they timed when Moshe Rabbeinu would come down from the mountain. Oh, it's Bo Sheish, the 6th hour has come, he hasn't come, must be a disaster, everything. So, and that's what leads to that terrible cycle of it's all finished, it's all over, we're done, there's nothing we can do, it's the end, right? Because of that, they fell down that trap. Through the construction of the Mishkan, Hashem wants to teach them that in life, sometimes you need to understand that it's at the moment when Hashem decrees it to happen that it will happen. And it won't be a moment before, and it won't be a moment after. He says like this, to read you a few lines of what he says. The says the Be'er Yosef, 3 months will pass until the command of Hashem will come to establish it. And only then they'll set it up. And only then Tisha B'Av Hashchina, the divine presence, will rest. To understand, to learn. Nothing large or small should be done. Even for the best of purposes to serve Hashem. Until there'll be a command from Hashem to do so. And the idea that they needed to wait in that sense, I think teaches us what it means to achieve things in a spiritual sense. We cannot, with the best will in the world, build this idea of a sacred space or even a sacred time. We can't get there overnight. Can't get there overnight. There is sometimes it takes time to get there. With the right ideas, we will get there. But we'll get there ultimately when Hashem wants it to be so. We can have tremendous ideals, tremendous ideas, but there is a process and there's sometimes a need for patience. That's the message of when the Mishkan would be built. It would only be built at the moment that Hashem would tell them to do so. So what we see, to sum up the ideas that we've discussed this evening, we see that the essence of the problem of the Egel Hazov was the idea of this Kol Onos Anochi, the idea of the sounds saying, I need to look out for myself. What's in it for me, only for me. Vaykhel comes along, as the Ramban says, straight after that failure of the Egel Hazov to unify the people, but not just to unify them in the sense of let's all get together to do something positive, but to really learn and understand what it means to create something together, which is both a sacred place and a sacred time as well. The idea being, as Shabbos represents, that you're building something not for its own sake, but for ultimately a place to achieve true spiritual connection as well. The beauty of Shabbos itself. And the people who understood this more than any other were the women, because their connection and their ideal, their drive to go and devote themselves to donate before the men to to whatever the Mishkan needed, they were rewarded with Rosh Chodesh, the time which represents more than any other how we build that precious time itself in our lives, that we build it for ourselves. Moshe Rabbeinu is hewing the Luchos Shnios. He is the one who is hewing those tablets himself. And we come along and sanctify Rosh Chodesh when we see the moon, something we need to do ourselves. And we also learn that the Mishkan will be put up at the moment that Hashem decrees it so. It won't be a moment too early, a moment too late. The people rushed head over heels into the Egel Hazov, come the construction of the Mishkan. They learned finally, through that process of Vaykhel, that when we come together to build something, when we do it with the right intentions, the right aims, the right ideals, be that the sacredness of place and the sacredness of time, representing the mission and the heart of that sacred place, it will come at the moment and the right time when Hashem decrees it to be so. That is the lesson, I think, and the message of these parshas. I wish you all a very good Shabbos, and thank you for joining.
Shkoyach, thank you.
Thank you.
Shkoyach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Okay, good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Shabbos, thank you.
Good Shabbos, pleasure. Thank you.